3.3 Stress, Anxiety and Arousal. Joel Story. Scenario 1. Stress. In terms of Scenario 1, we can clearly see high levels of stress in Nick when performing, which is a major contributing factor to his recent poor performance due to the particular type of stress Nick is going through. Firstly, stress is defined as a pattern of negative physiological states and physiological responses occurring in situations where people perceive threats to their well-being, which they may be unable to meet. This definition was by Lazarus and Folkman in 1984. In the case of Nick, it is clear that he experiences a type of stress known as distress, which is causing his problems in terms of performing well in games. As you can clearly see from the graph above, distress causes performance to decrease and is a contributing factor to his poor performance all season. Distress is an extreme form of anxiety, nervousness, apprehension, or worry, and is a result of perceived inability to meet demands. This particular type of stress is therefore causing Nick to not play well, as distress is commonly linked with lack in performance, as the graph above shows, at this bottom decline here. Stress process is a theory developed by McGrath in 1970 and states that firstly, in terms of stress, we see the task ahead as a demand. This demand can then be either perceived in two different ways, which will determine the particular type of stress a person will inhibit. The two ways in which we can perceive this demand is in the form of either a challenge, which is positive, or a threat, which is negative. These different approaches, therefore, will cause different types of stress to be apparent in our bodies. For example, if a person perceives this demand in a positive way, in the form of a challenge, then this will lead to eustress, which, as the graph above shows here, that this will also lead to increased performance. However, in the case of Nick and Scenario 1, we can see this demand being perceived by Nick in a negative way, which is therefore resulting in distress, which is a key factor as to why he is struggling to perform well, as he is showing clear signs of this distress, which the graph and this stress process shows will result in a decrease or reduced performance. Nick shows these high levels of distress in the form of both somatic and cognitive. Somatic stress is to do with the physiological factors that occur in the body when high levels of stress are present, whereas cognitive stress is more related to the mental and emotional factors that will occur in the body when distress is present. In terms of Nick in Scenario 1, it is clear that he shows signs of both somatic and cognitive stress. You can clearly see this somatic stress in the form of feeling nauseous before games. This is an evident sign of somatic stress, as feeling nauseous is a physiological occurrence that takes place in the body when high amounts of distress are present, which, as earlier discussed, is clear in terms of Nick. In addition, Nick also shows signs of cognitive stress in the form of struggling to play well all season despite being number 2 seeded, and also constantly worrying. This is therefore an example of cognitive stress, as these are mental occurrences caused by high levels of distress, causing a decrease in performance. Nick also seems unable to relax, which is another example of this cognitive stress. These two types of stress are therefore being present in Scenario 1 show how distress is negatively affecting Nick's game in relation to the graph, as well as how Nick's performance and distress problems link in towards how this stress process is dealt with in terms of Scenario 1, and overall how these high levels of distress and other stress related factors are influencing this clear decrease in performance that Nick has seen, as the graph shows here above. Moving on to Scenario 1, anxiety. In terms of anxiety in Scenario 1, we can clearly see high levels of trait anxiety present in Nick in terms of his sporting and college life. Firstly, anxiety is defined as a negative state of worry, apprehension, or tension that often occurs in the absence of real or obvious danger. Typically, the tension felt by anxious individuals is accompanied by a heightened state of physiological arousal. This was defined by Buckwork and Dishman in 2002. Anxiety therefore differs from stress earlier discussed, as this is a reaction to the current demand, while anxiety is a reaction to something that may or may not happen at a future date. This, in the case of Nick, shows that it is clear that Nick suffers from something known as trait anxiety. This is where a person has a personality disposition that is consistent throughout everyday life, where they tend to worry a lot. Having high levels of trait anxiety will therefore cause people to worry in a variety, if not all, situations. In terms of Nick, it is clear that he suffers from this trait anxiety as opposed to state anxiety, which is a temporary, ever-changing mood state that is an emotional response to a situation considered to be threatening. It is clear that Nick has what is known as trait anxiety, as this anxiety is not just present during sporting situations, but can also be applied to his everyday life. This is evident as the scenario states that he worries not just in the case of sports, but also in other situations such as schoolwork. This shows that the trait anxiety is present as opposed to state, as this is a consistent personality characteristic that we can see clearly throughout his daily life. This therefore means that this is not just a temporary feeling and is a consistent trait within his personality characteristics, therefore defining this as trait anxiety. Similarly to stress, anxiety can take the form of both somatic and cognitive anxiety. Somatic anxiety is in the form of the physiological factors that affect the body. For example, this could take place in the form of increased muscle tension, clammy hands, high heart rate, queasy stomach, and more. These particular symptoms are also the same as symptoms of arousal, which we will later discuss. Building from this, as we understand that somatic anxiety is the physiological changes that occur in the body, we can clearly see that this is evident in the form of Nick feeling sick or nauseous before games. This is a clear sign of somatic anxiety, as this is a physiological change that occurs to Nick's body and also falls under the symptoms of this somatic anxiety. On the other hand, cognitive anxiety is in the form of mental and psychological factors that occur within the mind that cause negative thoughts and can lead to failure. Examples of this type of anxiety include apprehensive, inability to concentrate, negative thoughts, and more. This particular type of anxiety is also clear in terms of Nick, in the sense that it is clear that Nick is unable to concentrate and is having negative thoughts, doubting his ability to perform well. These are symptoms of this cognitive anxiety and help to show Nick possesses both somatic and cognitive features of anxiety as well as trait anxiety. Nick also shows signs of competitive anxiety during and before games, as well as possessing trait anxiety. This is where a performer specifically perceives competitive sporting situations as potentially threatening. It is clear that Nick feels threatened and anxious when performing or about to perform during his sporting situations. This is due to the fact that the scenario states that Nick is a very good player at his sport and therefore should be performing well based on this and being number 2 seed. However, we can see he possesses these states of anxiety before he performs and during, as it says he feels sick before games, and also his performance falls apart after making one mistake, which is a sign of this competitive anxiety. Overall, it is clear in terms of Nick and scenario 1 that he possesses high trait anxiety as well as other factors such as somatic, cognitive and competitive anxiety. All of these factors therefore contribute as reasons as to why Nick is experiencing this downfall and decrease in performance, and why he is struggling to play as successfully and at the level that he should be performing at.